Welcome to the Humour in Games podcast, an analog and video games podcast about how humor is experienced, designed, and analyzed in games.
We are Scott DeYoung,
Mark Lajeunesse,
and Andre Zanescu,
and we'll be your guides in this 6-episode series. Throughout each episode, we'll break down different theories and forms of humor. We'll draw on interviews with designers, critics, and academics as they discuss the different aspects of humor, their own lived experiences, and how their work utilizes humor in games. This week we talk with narF, a game designer and podcaster who has experimented with humor in their independent and collaborative projects. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about kind of like who you are as a game designer?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects for me. It's like there's one part that is like work, my job, my day job, and there's my night life. Or my hobbies, if you can say that. So like on my day job, I'm a game designer at Ludia. So I'm working on mobile games, the free-to-play kinds with the big license, with big dinosaurs from the Jurassic Park franchise.
Okay.
So that's my day job. You'll probably notice there's not much humor in there. Because it's a very quote-unquote serious game.
Okay.
And then on my nightlife, it's like I put the Batman mask and I become, I don't know, some sort of weird game designer who just follow my passions, whatever I find interesting in, I just dive into the rabbit hole, and then go so deep that none of my friends understand anymore what I'm doing. And if you ask me these days, I'm not even like on my personal life, I'm not doing much in terms of games. I'm more into like electronics and then music. These days it's a lot of music.
Wait, you're designing your own music?
Huh?
Like you're designing your own music, you mean?
Yeah. I'm learning tools to make music, doing some composing.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, which is very much not funny, I guess. Although sometimes you get a like I'm into synthesizers, and sometimes you get a funny noise, and I'm like, whoa, I'm gonna use this funny noise, and I imagine a story for a song. It's like, oh, this is like a bunch of robots that are like all derpy and they're singing. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, no, I mean that's super fair. I mean, Sound Studies has some amazing like humorous things you can do. Mark's a musician himself. I'm sure he can definitely relate to what you're saying there.
I agree.
I'm very new to this, so like I don't have much to say. Like I'm very much learning.
Yeah, we'll focus on the games today because I mean that's the focus of the podcast.
Yeah, of course.
You're kind of that transition.
Yeah, I mean that's the story of my life. Always focusing and running around doing whatever interests me, and like the games that I've shared with you. All the game jam games, they were all based on that. It was like, oh, it would be interesting to do something like this, and then we do it either by myself or with friends during a game jam, and that's the game.
Right. I mean, so before we kind of get into your games, I also wanted to just kind of ask you, like, what are some games that you would say are humorous that you've played before that you think are like a funny game?
That's a tough question because there's like games that have a hard time being funny. Like sometimes they will try to be funny and there's always problem with timings or with expectation. And while I will read the text or hear the cutscene and it's funny, I'm not laughing like you would laugh when you watch something that's not a game, but is funny. Um,
Okay, I mean that makes sense. Like, what? But why would you like? What's the difference then for you there? Like, why would you laugh then, say, like in a movie for something that's funny versus in a game? It's
I
in my head, but not.
okay. Yeah, some people way smarter than me have written articles and texts about like what m- how to do something funny and how to write funny moments and make the player laugh in games. I'm pretty sure it was like Tim Schafer who wrote stuff like it's all about the timing. Um, like you need the setting, you need the game kind of have to tell you like, okay, now here comes a funny moment, and then build up to it, and then tell the joke, and then it's you laugh.
Right.
So, but that's when you try to write a cutscene or a dialogue that is funny. And I think this is probably not the best way of making a funny game. Whereas some games have pretty much no writing, but are super funny. And I'm thinking of, oh, what's the name? Watam. Have you heard of Watam?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, it's the latest game by the creator of Katamari Damacy.
Okay.
What's his name? Takaishi, something like that. It's a Japanese guy. The guy who made Katamari, which was kind of funny and also weird, and now he made Watam, and there's pretty much no dialogue or very little. It's all speech, like speech icon. They speech with icons and stuff. But there's some really funny moment in there when you play with other people around. Like what I'm trying to say is that's another thing. Like what makes a game funny? It's when like often playing alone, it's like there's no context for laughing. But when you're playing with other people who are kind of laughing, and now you have a build up or an audience for your laugh. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually comes across in some of the work that you shared with us prior to the interview. Like, Mark and I were playing I forget the name of it, where you're like directing the rocket ship. Mark was quite good at getting his gnomes, and I was horrible at getting my flamingos.
Oh, you played it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course, man.
Oh, nice.
It was great.
Played it.
I felt very accomplished when I beat him. It was great.
You plugged two mouse and it worked?
Yeah, it worked.
Oh, nice. This was such an experiment. Like this game, we were like, can we plug two mice? Like it used to work like when I was in preschool or something, we would do that, plug two mouse in the computer and then fight for the cursor or something like that. And I guess I brought this idea with my friends at the game jam saying like, hey, I remember this. Like we were fighting for the mouse. Like, does it work nowadays? Like modern Windows, if you plug two mouse in the computer, does it work? And it totally did. So we were like, oh shit, let's make a game out of this. And the game built itself.
Right, so in that context, you kind of went with like the idea for it first, and then you kind of were like, how do I make it funny? Or did you already think that idea itself was kind of funny?
I mean, fighting for a mouse cursor is already funny. Like, because like as soon as there's like gesture involved and you want to go fast, you need to press fast. Like, it's like those Mario Party game where you like mash buttons and stuff. It becomes funny because like your muscle are doing some quick action as fast as possible and you're trying to do it more quickly than the opponent, than your friends. Mm-hmm. And then you start laughing because like what you're doing is so ridiculous. Like you're mashing a button, you're rotating the joystick in Mario Party, or you're just like shoving the mice of the computer mice around to like, no, bring the cursor on my side. And you're like, ah! And people like just start laughing. I don't even know why. It just happened. Like, but they all laugh. Like, I don't think anybody have played this game without being laughing or smiling.
Well, that's really interesting because I mean, Mark and I talked slightly after, but like, is there a point when this game becomes frustrating for one player? Because I mean, we only played it a few times, and Mark was definitely better than me every single time we played. But and I enjoyed it, but I was like, we talked about like, is there a point where playing this game too much, there becomes a level of frustration? And so, for as a designer, is there like is that a consideration when you design these kind of crazy mechanics that like you might be frustrating your players and taking away from the joke?
If we were doing a longer game, then for sure I would consider that. Like, as a designer, you design the experience, so of course you think about those things. For this game, we were doing a game jam game, which means that player will play it for about 30 seconds, and maybe they will replay it once or twice, but they'll get the idea and say, "But I got the idea," and then I can stop playing. This is usually what happened. So for this particular example, for No, I'm the Captain, like, we didn't think too much about like the longevity of the game.
Right.
The game was made in like 2-3 days, and then played for a few events, and that's it.
Right. I mean, talking about a game that looks like it had a little bit of a longer life. I couldn't find the name for it, but the one where you're catching the fish with the water bowls.
It's called a fishing game with actual water.
Right. Okay, so that's the actual title. I wasn't sure.
That's the actual title. I'm very proud of this title because, yeah.
Yeah, no, if you want to, just because for the nature of the podcast, if you want to just kind of talk about that game a little bit and kind of your design process for it, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay, so a fishing game with actual water. There was this person online. She organized a fishing game jam. And I was like, "Ooh, that sounds interesting." And a few months before that, I saw a video for the Makey, which is like a device that you can plug anything into it, and then it turns into input for a computer. And you can use it for, like, I don't know, build up crazy controllers. So when I saw this game jam, I was like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to buy this device and do something with it. Like, now I have an excuse to buy it instead of just, oh, it would be cool. And so I don't exactly how the idea came from, but it was really like, I want to make a fishing game with real water, and I'm going to use this device because I think it will work. And I didn't know how it would work, but I knew I wanted to use real water. And I guess I knew I wanted to be 2-player because I wanted like some sort of a fight between the two. Oh, I guess. Oh no, that's true. There was another game. What's his name? There's a guy. He's famous for making weird controller games, and it was a game called Punch the Goo or something like that, where there's a bowl of like gooey stuff. I don't remember what's it's cornstarch and water. It makes a weird goo, and he made a game about playing with this goo, and he thought it was very funny to punch it, so he made a game called like Punch the Goo or something like that, in which you had to punch it as fast as you can in 30 seconds. And I was like, I want to do this, but with a fishing game with real water. And then that's how the idea came from.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's a really cool. It kind of had like also like the Dance Dance Revolution, or kind of like, because you had to hit the arrows, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, with real water. And if you want to know like how my design intention influenced the game, Like there's some details in the game. Like at first the fish goes slowly for the two players to learn the mechanic. But I realized quickly that if they fall very slowly or very few fish at a time, then the player have time to move his hand from each ball of water without splashing too much. And then I was like, but this is boring. I want lots of splashing. So the game gradually increased in speed, and there's more and more fish until I think at the end there's like just way more fish than you can possibly hit. So the player go into some sort of frenzy where they just try to like splash, 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 and then by going quickly, splash more water around. And this is very funny.
No, it looked hilarious. It also looked quite fun to play. And so, like, I guess in that design process, so you were asking kind of yourself as like, I mean, I made this mechanic, it works, but it could be funnier is kind of what you went through there?
It's like at first I tried to build the prototype and I was like, okay, it works, but I want more splashing. So I'm going to try increasing the speed over time, and then which increased the splashing, which was more funny.
Yeah, no, and I totally get that. I guess what I'm curious is like, did you kind of, so when you're in the design process, right, you kind of have this idea, and it sounds like you were inspired with this idea of the Punch the Goop, where you wanted to see if you could use water to kind of make the game. And so I'm curious is like, to when did your desire to make the game funny come into that design process? Was that like always an intention of like, this will just be funny intentionally because they're already splashing in the bowls? Like when you thought about that, was humor kind of there from the get-go, or did it kind of come later on once you've kind of hammered out the mechanics?
I see. So basically you're asking, was it my intention to make a humorous game before I started doing it?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think so. I mean, this is the thin line between funny and fun. Like, usually you want to make a game that is fun, and being funny and laughing is one way of doing it. I mean, I guess like it's been a while. I don't remember exactly what was my thought process, but I guess because I wanted to build a game with real water, I kind of knew it would be ridiculous, and and I guess I went to. I don't know. I don't know if I wanted to be funny or if I just wanted lots of splashing.
Okay.
Which was my it's like I wanted the players to get wet. So maybe I made it for me to laugh at the players.
I mean, that's still technically a humor game. I mean,
Yeah, it's funny for me at least. And the player think like they seems to find it very funny also. So yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the questions we have as well is like, as a designer who's designing, somewhat funny games with somewhat funny mechanics, are you designing around like what you consider funny, or do you kind of consider, oh, I think my audience might actually find this funny, even if I don't find this to be like the funniest thing ever?
Uh, it depends. There are some games I made that I think I'm the only one finding it funny or fun. Sometimes I make game just for myself. I mean, the audience is myself. This game will be played by me, and probably no one else will get it. And not necessarily in terms of a joke, but in terms of it's so weird and obtuse.
Do you have an example?
Well, I made a game called Light Game, and it's more of a decoration than a game. It's like there's little squares of light that appears on the screen, but the pattern only change every 5 minutes. So the game is basically wait until all the little squares are lit. but it's random, so you can wait a very long time. And then when they all lit, you can click in the screen and you level up, and there's more square to light up, and they slightly change color. And so it takes hours and days to play this game, like months to reach like the end game. And there's like maybe 2 people I know who played it because nobody gets it. So this is not funny. I didn't make this thinking like, ha ha ha, I'm gonna laugh at the player. I was trying to design a different kind of experience, more a Zen experience, more of a like a game that tests your patience.
Right.
But it's the same kind of design. It's like the intention was to make something Zen, so I made it and tweaked it. Like the 5-minute rule was not meant as a joke, but as a like, well, that's how the game worked. The game is for patient people. When trying to make a funny game or a ridiculous game, I'm gonna design it. I'm gonna tweak the design to get to the ridiculous, to get to the funny.
Right. So for a lot of like, it sounds like maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but for you, humor kind of comes in after you kind of had your idea for a game, where it's like you have this idea for a mechanic or how to kind of create the overall project, and then you kind of think, now what can I tweak about this that I personally find kind of humorous?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I mean, for me, I'm sure there are some people who start designing saying like, I want to make a funny game. But me, usually it starts with something else, like either a mechanic or an intention, or usually for the funny games, it's usually a mechanic or something like that.
Right. Well, and so when we talk about mechanics, I mean, that's one of the things that we've been talking about as a team as well, is kind of like how do you know when a mechanic is funny, especially when you're in the design process for so long for someone?
I don't know. Like the only funny stuff I did was with wacky controllers. So like if you're asking me like how to design a normal game with that you play with the keyboard or with a controller, a normal game, quote unquote, how to design a normal game that is funny, I have no idea. I have no idea. Like this is probably very difficult. I would have to think about it. But like how on my side when I make like if I want to make something funny, yeah, it usually come after.
Yeah, and I mean, I think every designer, and for some of the designers we've been talked to, like I think a lot of their own personal knowledge is in how they design. So I like this idea of like a normal game versus not. Like for us, we're really interested in you and your practice. And like for you and your practice, when you're designing, right, you kind of start with this mechanic that you've been playing around with. And then when you as the designer, when you're making, say, that either that light game or the fishing game without water or with actual water, like when in that process you're like, oh no, this mechanic is now funny, or like I'm going to try to make this mechanic more funny. Like what are you considering? When in the process are you kind of putting humor into that mechanic for yourself?
Let me think a little, because I mean, in all those games I shared with you are kind of old, at least 5 years old. How do I guess I don't know if I even think about it being funny, but I think about it being fun, and fun is so vague.
Yeah, I mean, so like you talk about this idea of like ridiculous, right? Like the game of like
Yeah, maybe that is more of an intention. For example, the Mimo Vision. The other did I share videos of that with
which
you? The Mimo Vision, the game with that you have to mime, and it's
yeah,
the two-player game. Okay, I shared videos of that. Okay, good. So for this game, I think we wanted to do like this async gameplay where one player has vision of the truth and the other player has the control and they have to communicate. But I guess I was like, oh, but with movement it would be funnier. with miming, is that a word?
Yeah.
Okay. With miming the intention by blocking communication, like verbal communication. And then we made tricks in that game. We made tricks where the game lies to the person with the controller, and the person with the vision have to like tell the truth. And so it creates funny moments, whereas the player with the control is facing a wall, but there's no wall. I mean, they see a wall, but there's no collision in that wall. The player with the truth is miming like go forward and then moving his hand, doing a gesture like go forward. And the player with the control is like, but I'm stuck at the wall. What do you want me to do? And the other one's like, come on, man, just go forward. And this clash of like information, and the person doing the gesture, they don't understand why the other player is like taking so long, because they see no wall, and they're just like, just why don't you go forward? And this problem of communication, I think, is kind of funny. At least the player find it funny, so we made more of those.
Yeah.
And there's a set of doors with passwords that you have to, well, communicate the password by gestures, and then it becomes a game of miming. So like I'm gonna mime an angel or a dog or something like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that really shows through in your work. And I mean, that game looks really, it kind of reminded me of Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes a little bit. The idea where one person has all the information and the other person doesn't. Or like each have bits and they're trying to put it together.
Yeah, and those are, I don't know if they are funny during the gameplay, but they are certainly funny after the gameplay. Like when the bomb explode, the players are very like, oh, why did you tell me that? Oh, it was so unclear. And I mean, that game, they go on purpose to use like little symbols that are incomprehensible, or making a manual that is so obtuse and makes no sense. And it's I don't know if it's funny. Like if it was a real manual, if you bought a chair at IKEA and those were the instructions, you would be frustrated. But because it's a game and the consequences aren't so dire, I mean, then it becomes funny. I don't know. It's also because you're two players. I think it's much easier to make players laugh when there's more player in the room.
Yeah, so that's a piece we were also kind of interested in, and your games, I think, speak to this quite well, is kind of the social aspect of humor for games, both in the players communicating, but also in the idea of like having spectators or an audience.
Yeah. Like for example, in Mimo Vision, if that game you played alone with like a Kinect or something, it would be just frustrating. It would be just like you fighting against the controller that doesn't recognize your movement correctly, and you would be frustrated. But doing that with an audience where the player have to mime and they know they are ridiculous, but that's the game. To play this game, they must endure being completely ridiculous, doing completely funny movements to talk with the other person. And the player with the control look at the player and saying like, you look completely ridiculous, but that's what we need to finish this game, so let's continue. And especially during a game jam, there's often an audience around those two players, so they play together, but they also have spectators, and the spectators are just looking at those two being completely silly, being like, what are you even doing? They might not even understand the nuances of the game. It's like, why are you doing all these gesture? Like, what is going on? And it's intriguing and it's funny. I mean, it's always funny to watch your friends doing silly dances and movements or splashing waters or yeah.
Yeah, and I think that really shines through in your games. I mean, the idea that like it sounds like you've almost designed some of them around the idea of having an audience. Like, is that a fair thing?
Yeah.
Kind of design your humor around people watching these people play, like because you were saying yourself, you want to laugh at them playing, right? Like even if that audience is just you.
Yeah. I mean, this is stuff that comes. I mean, maybe it's. I don't know if it's me, but I think for any good designer, they will get there by intuition. Like we didn't like when we were designing those games with my teammates, we weren't sitting at the table saying like, how are we going to make the player laugh? Like, no, nobody designs like that. Uh, we we throw ideas and we find it funny. It's like, oh, let's make a game where you have to do movement to communicate to the other players. Oh, they will do silly movement. It will be funny. And then, oh yeah, let's do that. It sounds funny. And so we find it funny. We prototype it and we're like, yeah, it's actually funny. It's actually, we're laughing. So that's good.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, I mean, for both Mark and myself, I mean, we've made some games on our side, but I don't think either of us would consider ourselves like game designers in the same nature you are. And so, for you, you're saying like it's absolutely like ridiculous that the team would sit down and go, let's design around being funny. So, like, when does humor kind of come into that for you guys, like, or for you in your own work? Like, when do you start thinking about humor in the design process?
I think it's kind of early on. It's you I mean, we start with, as I was saying earlier, like we start with the idea, and then we see some funny bits, and we were like, oh, is this the direction we want to go in, or are we making a game that's more serious? Because obviously, it will change everything. So when we all agree, like, oh yes, I think the best part of this idea is the funny moments that it can generate. Okay, now how can we make it more funny then? How can we increase this feeling? So if we are asking the player to do gestures, how can we make them do more elaborate gestures or bigger gestures? If we're trying to make them splash waters because it's funny, how can we make them splash more waters?
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And so the other piece to talk about is because Mark and I both, Mark helped me because due to the fact that the game was in French, but that other game that you sent, it's like a walkthrough where you're kind of,
Yes.
do you want to just talk a little bit about that one? Because that one seems like it's meant not for, unlike your other ones, which were meant for multiple players, that one was very much kind of meant for an individual to experience, correct?
Yes. Yes, this game is more of a traditional game that you're alone at your computer and you play this. Le météorologue et le vieux monsieur.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this game, how, let me remember. So this was also in a game jam where I had very little time. For this one, like, it was some sort of a sequel-ish to another game I made in school, where the important aspect was the voice of the narrator. So for this, I wanted to have a real human speaking. I wanted to be a normal voice, not a movie voice, not a TV voice, but like a normal person talking, telling a story, with français québécois, French québécois way of speaking, because like I wanted that voice to be heard. So that's why I made this game where the important aspect was the the voice, and then at which point did it become, oh, I want it to be funny? I don't remember. I guess it's sometimes it's just because like you're at a game jam and you have very limited time and you just want to work on what feels good at the moment. And I was thinking at my audience, like who will play this game? Like we will play it at the end of the game jam. I will show it to everybody. They will play it. It will be short. I want them to have a good time. So what's one way of doing that? Well, we can make a funny game with a giant squirrel and like a cloud that pees on the snub meteorologist.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
exactly. I think that game it shows a very different side of humor than the other ones. The other games that you sent have much more around like the mechanics of the game and the spectatorship of the game, and this one seemed very much more focused on the narrative.
yeah.
And so, like, what are kind of some of the differences that you would say you would think about in designing a game that's focused on narrative versus the other ones where you're focused more on the mechanics and spectatorship?
The differences, well, in a way, it's still kind of similar because you're still thinking of the player, you're still thinking of the audience, but the way they will play is different. If you're making a multiplayer game, well, you know that they will be standing next to each other, so they will probably they are in proximity enough to banter and poke at each other or splash water in each other's face to distract the opponent. When for Le Météorologue et le Vieux Monsieur, like I knew my audience would be one player with headphones to hear the game. So there's no audience at that moment. Anybody watching it would see nothing because the game has very minimal in terms of visuals and it's all about the audio.
Right.
That was also an important aspect of that game. Like I wanted to focus on audio to make audio games. And then I guess it was me writing under a very short time period with like a lot of pressure. Like I had very short time to write the script of that game. And I was like, I don't know, like, oh, there's a giant straw. And like, I don't even remember where the idea came from the meteorologist and the old man. I guess it was from the theme of the game jam. I really don't remember what the theme was, but I'm guessing there was probably something in there. Like it was probably a challenge like, can you put these 4 things in your game? And I was like, ha ha ha, look at me. I'm going to do it. And it's like you're trying to write a story, like this little fable that needs to have all these elements. And it's like, if I draw 4 words in a dictionary and ask you to make a story about it, like usually the only way to do that is like completely ridiculous and you're just pulling the ropes trying to make it happen. And then, so it's ridiculous, so let's embrace it and let's make it funny.
Kind of have like 2 other questions around this, and hopefully we can still be done in the hour that we said this would take. One is kind of, I mean, we were touching on it slightly. Like you designed that game, it's definitely a French game, and as Mark made it clear, it's definitely like a very specific French game. And so, as a designer, do you consider kind of like in that game, this audience is meant for this kind of individual? Like how much does like language or your audience make a difference in kind of how you're designing a game?
Oh, for sure. Like for this game, I knew that probably only French Québécois would understand the full aspect. Maybe French people from France would like understand most of it, but they might miss some words. And so it will be harder for them to laugh because half their brain is spent processing the language barrier. And then for Anglophone, like yeah, no, I'm sorry. No, you cannot play this game. I won't put subtitles because it won't work.
Yeah, I guess part of the question there, though, is like, is there a difference in how you design a game that's in French versus how you design a game that's in English, in how you conceptualize humor?
Uh, it's similar. I have a easier time writing in French, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and I have an easier time writing jokes in French, or things that will be funny. Um, in English, I can do it, but it will be more difficult, and sometimes I won't use the right word, and so the audience is reading, and again, half their brain is spent saying that's not the real word here. Oh, the author of this game is probably a francophone, and their brain is not fully dedicated to the act of the joke.
Right. I mean, that makes complete sense. Yeah. Okay, so just realizing we have 10 minutes left, and first off, again, thanks for the amazing interview so far. This is all.
Don't worry. I mean, unless you have stuff to do, I have the day
We
off.
do have
So.
an interview later today that we have to prep for, but I mean, that's good
Sure.
to be willing to go a little bit over, because it's not right after this. We wouldn't back-to-back interviews like that. However, I'm going to get to kind of those two hard questions now that you said. So, I mean, kind of after, talking about a lot of this, so and thinking about it and reflecting on a lot of the games that you've done, how would you kind of define humor as a designer?
This question is always difficult because I don't, again, there's people that are much more intelligent than me that can define humor and humor in games. I'm just a clown who don't know why it's funny.
Yeah, and I mean we're not looking for a theoretical answer here or anything. We're just more kind of to you, what is funny, what is humor? How do you understand that?
I mean, definitely doing funny movements is definitely funny. Asking people to step out of their usual boundaries in a way that is friendly and casual and we're all laughing and it's a game. I think this force people to embrace being ridiculous, and then they laugh. So I guess that's funny. that's very basic for an answer.
No, I mean, and we're, like I said, we're not looking for anything specific. It's more just kind of part of how I believe in. I actually think it's quite a good answer, and then part of how I try to define things is how people in themselves define it. I think is a great way to kind of figure it out. So I don't in any way I think that's a boring.
I mean, when you laugh, it's funny. And yeah, I make a game, I'm laughing, I think it's funny, the audience is laughing, they think it's funny, the players are laughing, they think it's funny. All right, I guess that's a funny game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to approach it. I mean, so would you say then part of designing for humor is kind of iterative design, where you bring prototypes to people and you see how funny they find it, and then you ask yourself, well, can I make this funnier? What can I do?
Oh my god, yes, of course. That's how you make games in general. That's how you get good games, and that's for sure how you get funny games. The let's say Portal is a funny game, and because they have good timing, and they iterated so much on their level to get the puzzles right, but also to get the jokes right and to tweak them so much. And that's for sure, iterative is the way to go. And I'm sure if you ask a stand-up comedian, how do you make your 1 hour show, and they'll be like, well, I wrote some joke, I tried them in a bar, and one of them made people laugh and the rest was terrible, so I keep the good one, and then maybe I rework the bad ones, or I scrap them and find new ones. That's iterations, I guess. So for games, it's the same thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's nice to hear it from a designer as well. I guess since we have some time, if you don't mind, one of the pieces we've kind of been talking about as a team, and we're not sure how much it applies, is this idea of like memes and meme culture, and like what a meme is as opposed to humor. And it kind of seems like some of your games have mechanics that people might say like you're memeing about game design or you're memeing about like controls. Do you ever kind of think about the term meme or kind of like consider that in your work?
I've never heard that word used in that way. For me, a meme is like a funny image on the internet. Like
Okay.
I've never heard used as a verb.
Okay.
So I don't know. Maybe you can explain what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, meme alone is its own can of worms, and when it comes to humor and when we're defining the term, right? So, like, some people will say, like, a meme is like that image that you imagine, right, with text or whatever online. But some people would say, like, oh, that person is a meme, or they are memeing in what they're doing, which would be like they're doing something somewhat humorous or ironic or incongruous to something else. Which so like I was just curious if it's something that you've considered at all in your work, and it's not, and that's totally fine. Because
I don't think so, no.
yeah, and that's totally fair.
Like, not that I don't make little funny images with texts that are memes, and I share them with my coworker. So, but that's
Yeah.
that's not my art. Like, that's not my
Yeah,
craft.
no, for sure. I 100% agree.
Oh,
Yeah.
I guess when you make those kind of images, it's still the same process. You're still thinking about the audience.
Right.
Like when I make a joke about the tools that we use at work that is terrible and slow, and I share the joke with my coworkers, I know they will find it funny. I don't share the same images with other people because they won't get the joke. So in a way, it's very similar. You always think about the audience.
That was our interview with narF. Thanks again to the Tag Lab for supporting this series, and thanks to you for listening.